Many of us have heard it said that if you improve your communication skills, then you will improve the quality of whatever relationship you might be working on. And that is absolutely true. But the thing about having heard that over and over and over is that you tend to take for granted just how important it actually is to work on your communication skills. Now, there are those of us who might be thinking to themselves, I mean, I'm a professional speaker given. That means all the relationships I'm in should be flourishing. So clearly the problem is not with me. That's not necessarily true. And I say that to the benefit of everyone else who might be thinking that by saying improve your communication skills, what I mean is take classes on how to communicate better, learn to pronounce, work on your grammar, or work on your projection, how loud or your tone and all of those things. That's not necessarily what I mean. And that means if you're a person who's a good public speaker, in other words, you're able to address an audience with which you're not familiar with, or an audience in a professional setting, it doesn't mean that those skills will translate when you zoom into more intimate relationships, like a romantic relationship. Now, it's also important for me to highlight that when we're speaking of relationships that need to improve through communication skills improving, we're not just talking about romantic relationships. We're talking about professional relationships. We're talking about relationships with family, with friends, with acquaintances, with people within your network, and people that you go to church with. All of those different types of contexts or relationship contexts require you to communicate at a different level. Some require you to be a bit more informal than others. Whereas if you're at work, you're going to speak a bit more professionally because it's a work setting. And then you'll have those people within your work setting who you're more familiar with. Right? They are more friends than they are colleagues. So with them, you'll be a lot more relaxed. Then you have people who are within your network with whom you can have a braai, but there are certain things you're not going to have political conversations with them because they are part of your network. So you don't want to have any polarizing conversations with them that might push them away. So you keep those opinions to yourself. So that is the discipline of communication for one, learning to understand the context. We will speak more about context in future, you learning to understand how to identify the context in which you're having whatever conversation you might be having. But there are other things to communication, right? Where we have things like vulnerability, knowing how much of your vulnerability is needed within this particular context. For example, if you're having a conversation with a spouse, a wife or a husband, or you're having a conversation with a child, a person who looks up to you and to whom you're a guardian, you're going to be a bit more vulnerable. Or if you're not, you need to learn to be a bit more vulnerable to them so that they can identify you as a space of safety. There are some people who make this mistake that just because you're a boss at work, or at work you're the most efficient communicator, then you make the mistake of thinking that those skills transfer and you can just speak just the same when you're speaking to people that you're more familiar with. Or maybe let's say you're a policeman, you work as a policeman or a person of high authority. Then you think that the way that, even if you're working as a pastor or a shepherd, a leader at church, you tend to think that those communication skills that you have there are good enough and they translate to your more intimate context of communication. And that's not necessarily true. Believe you me, but vulnerability can be a learned skill. Learning to say I'm sorry, learning to say I made a mistake, learning to say I want to listen to what you have to say and hold back your own opinions takes a lot of discipline. And all of these are things that you can work on in order to improve those intimate relationships. Why do I separate these intimate situations or relationships from the more professional ones? If you want to invest, you want to make an investment, right? If we're talking about what is an investment that'll have the most return, I can give you this advice for free. Your more intimate relationships are the ones that you should be investing in more than your professional relationships. What do I mean? go and learn to be vulnerable with the people at home than with the people at the office. Because when you go back home, the people that are waiting for you are the people at home. The people that you want to be rooting for you while you're working and toiling at the office are the people at home. So learn to become a safe space for them, right? And that's the thing, another thing about communication. It's not just about what you have to say, but it's about also learning to become a receiver of communication. So there's two parts to this. There's first the ability to speak, then there's the ability to listen, which I would argue is far more valuable than the ability to speak, because then you can say very few words addressing something that you've heard, and you can bring light into someone's life, right? That's something to consider. Now, the importance of you learning first of all, which communication skills you need. For one, do you need to learn how to speak well, or do you need to learn how to listen well, or do you need to learn both? You're going to need to observe the things that the people you're in a relationship with are complaining about. I mean, I've had this, and I'm very, very proud of the fact that I've spent a long time working on improving the skill. I wasn't a very good listener, especially because I speak so well. I always believed that my words are valuable. So as a result, I didn't spend a lot of time listening to the people around me, and also learning the discipline that sometimes you don't need to say much. You just need to say, I understand and I get what you're going through. I empathize with that. Those are words that confirm and affirm the people that you're speaking to, right? And learning to look at a person, identify what they're going through, listen to understand is a very, very difficult. I mean, you can say this over and over, but very few people know and can acknowledge that I was listening there, but I wasn't listening to understand. I was listening to respond. Not every conversation has to be a fight. You don't have to win every conversation you engage in. It's not always a battle. And that's something I had to learn, right? I had to learn not to be the loudest person in the room. I had to learn to assimilate. If I'm in an environment and I'm with friends who are very soft-spoken, then I needed to adjust my volume to accommodate them and for them to not feel threatened within the conversation. Because here's another thing that happens, right? As you're speaking, your body will eventually assume posture, and your body will communicate so much more than you think. Sometimes you might find that you're very gentle in what you're saying, you're very gentle in the words that you're using, very gentle in your tone, but your body is very aggressive, right? There are those of us, I mean, like myself, that when we speak, the more you get excited about the conversation, the more it gets communicated through your body and through the way that you speak. So you're going to have to learn to identify when your body does that and then learn to adjust accordingly. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, but given I'm a soft-spoken person, if anything, I always find myself in situations where I struggle for my voice to be heard, or I struggle to demand people's attention. You yourself have something that you need to work on. It's not just those who are aggressive. You need to learn that there are situations where I need to then force my opinion, not force in as much as be a bit more aggressive with getting people's attention so that they can listen to me. This is not only in a work setting, but also in a social setting. You find that there are friends that are louder, more aggressive, and a lot more demanding of attention than others. Therefore, there are those who don't get heard as much. And as a result, you know, the thing about communication is that those who communicate well have an appearance of intelligence. They seem and appear smarter than other people when they're actually not. So that's something for you to consider, that it's very important for you to voice yourself, because it can make you seem as though you're not as intelligent, or that you don't care enough to engage in a conversation with the person that you're in a relationship with. So if you're a person who whenever there's conflict, you sort of disappear into yourself, you might think you're doing them a favor by gathering your thoughts, right? And giving yourself time to breathe. And there's nothing wrong with that. But remember that there will be times when you have to engage the situation as it is. And because if you don't do that, you're sending a message to the other person saying that you don't value the relationship enough for you to say something to diffuse what's happening in the room right now. Because if we leave things as they are, the conversation has ended altogether. There are so many more aspects to this that we can cover, but we don't have enough time. But we will be continuing with this conversation and discussion in the near future, so do stay tuned for that. But for now, just hold on to those. And I'm going to leave you with this question. Do you have an aspect of your communication skills, specifically within the context of your intimate relationships? Do you feel like you need to work on vulnerability? Do you need to work more on listening and learning to empathize with a person's situation before you even give them a solution? If you're a person who is very biblical you're very biblically minded, you tend to give scriptures before you've given a person the opportunity to just express themselves, to just feel what they're going through and process. Sometimes a person is talking to you for the sake of processing. So identify what your issues are and then rate yourself from a scale of 1 to 10. How good are you at that thing, and where do you want to be in a couple of days or a couple of months?